Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me at the start of another week. It's good to have you with us. Once again, there is a lot to catch you up on. We're also once more in a position where events here in the United States are pushing the coronavirus pandemic off center stage. And once again, we focus on the social unrest that is taking place here in America. All of this as we basically take in another killing of a black man at the hands of white police officers, which is leaving another family in mourning and bringing people out on the streets in protest. This time we're talking about a 27-year-old, this young man, RAYSHARD Brooks, who lost his life over the weekend in Atlanta. We're going to have all the details for you in a live report from Atlanta. His family has just been speaking. We're going to bring you those details. And if you were with us last week, you know that we started the conversation around reform and the need to reform many of the institutions here in the United States. We've been talking about criminal justice reform. Today, we're going to keep the conversation going. We're going to be talking about reforming prisons, and we're going to look at the connection between prisons and the way black and brown communities are policed here in the United States. We're going to be looking at that. Plus, this coronavirus pandemic has put a halt on basically everything we love, everything that we do and have taken as, come to take as for granted, rather, is the word I'm searching for. Even sport and the beautiful game of football. That too is at a standstill. We're going to be speaking to Anthony Baffo, the Deputy Secretary General of the Confederation of African Football. He will be here with us to tell us about the discussions that are happening behind the scenes and why football is standing with the protesters that are taking to the streets here in the United States. There is a lot to tackle. Let's get started. Well, just 3 weeks after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis brought people out onto the streets and cities across the United States and across the world, we are once again talking about another case of lethal force used by police. This time we're talking about a killing in Atlanta of a young man, a 27-year-old man called RAYSHARD Brooks, who was shot and killed after police officers found him asleep in his car at a Wendy's drive-through restaurant. I want you to take a look at the body cam footage as it shows the officers waking up Mr. Brooks. Take a look at these images.
Hey.
Copy 41 no injury.
Sir.
25 westbound at Jones.
What's up, man?
25 west.
Hey, you're parked in the drive-thru right now. Hey, sir.
You
right?
Party, black Toyota Camry and an unknown.
Dude, you're parked. You're sitting in the drive-thru line here. What's up? Sir, you're parked in the drive-thru line. You're blocking traffic here. You were sleeping when I walked up here.
So that was RAYSHARD Brooks engaging with police as they woke him up. Shortly afterwards, things took a turn. There was a failed sobriety test, and then there was a scuffle that broke out as officers tried to cuff RAYSHARD Brooks. He managed to grab one of the officers' tasers and he took off running. We have video of the altercation. I want to be clear, we're not going to show you the moment at which RAYSHARD Brooks was shot. And even these images that we're about to show you, some viewers may find upsetting, but take a look at these images. We want you to get a sense of how things played out. You clearly see the scuffle there between Rayshard Brooks and the two police officers. As I said, he was able to grab the taser of one of those officers. He took off running. He was then shot several times in the back and died from injuries to his organs and blood loss. Since then, protesters have taken to the streets, shutting down a major highway over the weekend, and also setting fire to that Wendy's restaurant where he was found asleep. The autopsy has ruled that death as a homicide. And the question now is what happens next. We want to bring you the very latest from Atlanta. Haley Mason joins us from there. Haley, thank you so much for joining us. It's almost shocking to think that we're talking about another killing of a black man by police so soon, or at all, rather, after the killing of George Floyd just some 3 weeks ago. Bring us up to speed with the very latest on this case and what's emerging.
Isha, thank you so much for having me. I am live in Atlanta and have been covering the unrest from Atlanta through Ahmaud Arbery before George Floyd. But right now, this is a lot of raw emotion, understandable pain from this national outcry for justice and change that has now really come to the doorstep of Atlantans in Rayshard Brooks' killing on Friday. And so right now there was a pre-planned NAACP march called the March on Georgia. They are currently outside of the state capitol in front of Atlanta City Hall, demanding change for criminal justice reform, among a number of other things. They planned this before we knew Rayshard Brooks' name. Mm-hmm. At the same time, Rayshard Brooks' family just wrapped up a press conference within the last hour where they said that when George Floyd protests turned violent in Atlanta, they stood alongside Zone 3 police officers in Atlanta saying, don't burn down our city. Don't knock out the windows at the CNN Center. This is not Atlanta. Let's support the officers that we know. We want to stand with them. One of Rayshard Brooks' family members just said this afternoon. Then she added, this makes us want to eat our words. And that's telling that she says she doesn't know where to turn. The attorneys even indicated that they feel hopeless to a degree, even though they do this so often. And so while the family is speaking out today, the NAACP is marching and rallying downtown right now. The Fulton County District Attorney at the same time, Isha, is now considering 3 possible charges for the officer that fired his service weapon. Possible murder or felony murder are the 2 top charges that the District Attorney Paul Howard is considering, but also a possible voluntary manslaughter charge. We know that Officer Rolfe was fired. The other officer, Bronson, is on administrative leave. And we've seen the mayor speak out against this as well, use of force. And that is the discussion right now, Isha. What is appropriate or inappropriate use of force, and how do they determine more standard rules across the board?
And the question here is the level of transparency that will surround the investigation into what happened and how this all played out. What are we hearing from police authorities? We know that the police chief stood down, she resigned, and she'll be reassigned. What more are we hearing? Has anyone else spoken? The police union? What's happening?
It's interesting. The story I covered just a day before Rayshard Brooks' killing was a story about the Atlanta mayor forming a use of force community council, an advisory council that will be reviewing and possibly revising APD's use of force policies. That same day, I also spoke with the regional representative for the union, the International Brotherhood of Police Officers. They represent police officers in the Atlanta cases, and will be representing these officers. You can hear on the body cam, he says, "Let me call my rep," and he calls the rep that I spoke with that evening. And so right now, when we talk about transparency, I will say we were sent the body camera video, several different angles of body camera video very quickly. The mayor spoke quickly. There were disciplinary actions that happened quickly. I think that's one thing that we noticed that was different with what was happening in Atlanta before RAYSHARD Brooks. There were immediate terminations and then charges after 2 Atlanta University Center students were tased when they were leaving an area where protests were happening a couple weeks ago. And so I do think that there's a different level of transparency from my years as a reporter, where we are getting the body camera footage almost immediately. Generally, open records requests, as you know, can take at least a week. Yeah. And we got those within 24 hours, I believe, in our emails. And so right now, I think that our city leaders know that eyes are on them, and they have been releasing as much information, I would assume, as they can at this point, pretty quickly. But that they've started in that vein, and I believe that the expectation will continue, that they will be expected to continue to be as transparent as possible, because I do believe that we're just in a different environment now, and these protests and the outcries for change are not going to let up until there's some type of overall systemic change, as the protesters are demanding for right now. So I will say that they've been pretty forthcoming with their thoughts, and at least some of the video, to show everyone what has happened from the beginning through the end.
The Atlanta mayor was very forthright, and said that she did not believe that lethal force was justified in its use here. Are we witnessing a schism between political leaders and the police in Atlanta? And potentially, what does that mean, and how significant is this move taken by the mayor to come out so quickly and say categorically this was not right? What happened?
It's interesting what's happening between police and political leaders. I know when the officers were terminated and then charged for the tasing incident of the students, police chief, now former police chief Erica Shields, indicated that seemed to be more of a political move as opposed to one that was warranted. She had let them go, fired them, and the charges, I think, caught some of the police department off guard, but that's what protesters have been calling for. So I can't say that this was influenced by protesters at all, but we do see there was a difference in opinion, a stark difference in opinion, and some tension there when those officers were fired. Now, we haven't heard as much. Chief Shields resigned over the weekend after this. Now the deputy chief is in charge. And I do believe that now, again, the DA is considering some very serious charges here. I think you mentioned that Mayor Bottoms spoke out against what she saw on video. And one interesting thing that Mayor Bottoms said was there's a difference in what officers can do and what they should do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why she formed that task force, to really take a deep dive from a community perspective to possibly revise and at least add some uniformity to use of force policies that are being called into question, with some blurred lines on what discretionary use of force is.
Yeah, absolutely. Haley Mason, thank you so much for joining us. Some great insight into what's happening right now in Atlanta. We thank you. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you for having us.
Take care. Thank you. It's, again, hard to believe that we're talking about another killing of an unarmed Black man. During this time of social unrest, many people are calling for dismantling and reimagining of many of this country's institutions, which together basically create create a landscape that is toxic to millions of black and brown people every single day in this country. When we talk about the prison system, we need to give you some context. There are more than 2 million people who are imprisoned here in the United States. The majority of them are black and brown people. And what has emerged thanks to the work of activists over many years is that essentially this is a business. That's why you hear it often referred to as the prison industrial complex. This is a business that is underpinned by corporations who are motivated by profit. Many are saying it is time to take a look at the prison system, policing, how all of it fits together and how all of it is impacting the lives of black and brown people. Joining us now to talk about this in more detail is a woman who's devoted much of her life to these issues, and she's here to break it all down for us. Bianca Tylek is the founder and executive director of Worth Rises. She joins us now from New York. Bianca, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for having me, Aisha.
It's good to have you here. First of all, let me just ask you, just again, you're in this space, criminal justice. I know that human rights, civil rights, all of it matters to you. Just let me just ask you, first of all, your reaction to this latest killing of an unarmed black man, this time in Atlanta.
It's devastating. I think there's nothing short of saying that one after the other, and there was actually several other killings that happened over this weekend, the killings of a multitude of black trans folks over this weekend, the killing of RAYSHARD Brooks this weekend. We're in a desperate place in this country, and to know that this continues to happen even as tens of thousands of people take the streets is obviously very alarming, and people will continue to take to the streets until it stops.
Now, your organization, Worth Rises, has put out a document, it did so in the last few days, around this issue of defunding the police. Can you break down for our viewers what defund the police means to you? Because as you well know, there's been a lot of consternation, and some would say the term has kind of got caught up in a battle of semantics. What does it mean to you and your organization?
Sure. I think I just want to clarify one thing, which I think that the term is not confusing to anyone other than those who want to change it into something else. Mm-hmm. Those who actually created the term, the Movement for Black Lives, have been very, very clear about what the term means. I think it's unambiguous. It means defund police, and it means to the abolition of police. And so that is, as I said, unambiguous, and I think has been framed by others who may be uncomfortable with that notion as perhaps meaning something other than what it quite literally means. And that is what it means to our organization at Worth Rises. It means taking money away from police and moving that money to invest in social structures that actually create public safety and support for Black and brown communities, things like housing and education and social services.
When you look at the document that you put out, what I was struck by, as you laid out where the police get their funding, is that it is a patchwork of different interests, in much the same way as the whole prison system is underpinned by this patchwork of different interests. Can you talk to me about the way funding operates for the police here in the United States?
Absolutely. Thank you. So yes, at Worth Rises, we put out a resource last week in support and amplification of this demand to defund police. And that was first by explaining exactly how police are actually funded in the United States. And so there's actually 5 different funding streams that police draw from in order to fund their operations. The first is legislative budgets. That's the largest. That's the piece that people are most familiar with. This is what happens in elected offices. Elected officials are, in essence, charged with proposing, passing, and then signing legislative budgets, and that is where the largest chunk of funding comes for police departments and for prisons. But there are multiple others. And one of the important things to realize is that if you starve one or remove one funding stream, police and prisons are likely to lean on the others. And so it's important that we actually know what each one of those funding streams are and ensure that we're removing each of them. And so the second is fines and fees. Fines and fees are everything from traffic tickets when somebody's pulled over, to fines assessed for indigent offense, or court fees, or people who are in prison and in jail are often required to pay pretty egregious rates for telephone calls. And those, each of those telephone calls comes with commissions that are paid back to the jails or back to the prisons in order to support their operation. So eliminating those fines and fees is super important. Civil asset forfeiture being the third. Civil asset forfeiture is a very controversial practice that very few are familiar with. It gives the police the right to take your belongings so long as they suspect those items to be involved in a crime. A person does not have to be charged, does not have to be arrested, and certainly doesn't have to be convicted for their belongings to be taken and to be suggested that they are part of a crime. And police can keep those items. They can also sell them and use that money to fund the operation of their police departments. Fourthly, you have service contracts. Service contracts are contracts between law enforcement, police, and other public agencies or corporations. So for example, a contract between the police department in a local city and that local school. The public school system may use law enforcement and have contracts, and we saw in Minneapolis the public school district actually break its contract with police, and that's super important. Those contracts actually create funding streams. Similarly, your favorite NBA stadium might have a contract with the police department to provide security at games and other events, and that also creates a funding stream. And then finally, you have corporate support, and corporate support is the way in which corporations support police departments. So we typically see that in two different ways. One is the corporations essentially donating infrastructure, surveillance infrastructure. This is very common for retailers like Target, who might invest hundreds of millions of dollars in surveillance infrastructure for cities and towns and then hand over the keys to the police, and in some cases even run crime labs themselves. And then finally, you also have these corporations sponsoring trade associations for police, like the National Sheriff's Association and other types of police organizations. And those trade associations are backed by this power of the union that people have also been talking about, right? That actually protects officers who create and organize violence against Black and brown communities.
And Bianca, let me ask you just briefly, as you lay out these different streams that keep the law enforcement afloat here in the United States, when you look at the landscape, you've been doing this work for a long time, is it clear to you which of these are going to be easier to kind of cut off, which will be easier than the other? I mean, how do you look at the chances for success?
Great question. So they're all very different because they all, in many cases, have very different targets and decision makers, right? When it comes to legislative budgets and fines and fees and civil asset forfeiture, those are demands that must be made to elected officials. They've been hard-fought battles. It also means that the strongest opposition are police unions that fund elected officials. So demanding that elected officials stop taking money from police unions is part of what's going to get us to success around ending civil asset forfeiture, ending and eliminating fines and fees, and divesting financing in budgets. On the other side of things, service contracts and corporate support, the real decision makers are other agencies as well as corporations. And so those might be susceptible to public campaigns against corporations and work quite differently. And I think actually have right now an opportunity to be very, very successful given the amount of momentum there is in the street.
We're going to be watching this very closely. Bianca, we appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us. We know there's a lot going on, and we do want to get you back to talk more specifically about the prison system here in the United States. So I hope you'll come back and join us for that conversation.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I appreciate you having us.
Thank you. Take care. Be safe. All right. I want to thank you all for tuning in and sending in your comments. I'm having a few technical issues at this end in terms of pulling up your comments, so we're going to get those to you in just a moment. But in the meantime, let me move on and bring you the Africa numbers and bring you up to speed with how things are looking continent right now. As you take a look at the total number of confirmed cases, we're looking at 244,088. It's clearly that day where, you know, technically things are hitting a speed bump. So 244,088 total number of confirmed coronavirus cases on the continent. And then when we look at the active cases, we're looking at 125,971. The number of deaths recorded has gone past 6,551. Just to remind you very quickly of where things stand in the regions. In Northern Africa, Egypt is still leading the way as the most impacted country. Confirmed cases at last check over 44,598, and there have been over 1,575 deaths. Morocco, which has 8,838 confirmed cases rather, has only 212 deaths, but it has announced it's sending some 8 million masks and other medical supplies to 15 other African countries, including Burkina Faso, Cameroon, DRC, Tanzania, to name just a few. And I do just very quickly want to run through how things look in Central Africa. Cameroon is the most impacted country in the region there, over 9,800 cases, 276 deaths. The next most impacted in that region is DRC, where they're battling coronavirus and Ebola, over 4,800 cases there. Let's go to West Africa. Nigeria leading the way. One of the main doctors' unions is on strike. The Association of Resident Doctors has decided to strike due to poor pay. Total cases in Nigeria, over 16,000. Ghana, let's turn our attention to Ghana quickly. The president has made mask wearing in public mandatory there. Total cases over 11,964, approaching 12,000 cases in Ghana. And if we take a look at East Africa, we're also watching Sudan's numbers. Those are worrying, 7,220. Kenya, we're watching them as well, over 3,727 cases. And when we finish up in the southern Africa, the numbers far out in front in the region there, over 70,000 cases in South Africa, 70,038. The number of deaths, 1,480. We're also watching Zambia. Zambia's numbers over 1,358. So there's a lot going on, and even though, you know, this pandemic is being shifted out of the spotlight in many places, it is still a major story. Just to track through those numbers as you heard me do there, you'll see that the case numbers are not coming down. We have 244,000 cases on the continent, and we have 125,000 of those being active. We've got to stay on top of this story, and we'll continue to do that here on this show. So, having given you a picture of where things stand on the continent in terms of numbers, let's take a look at the impact of COVID. It is impacting practically every part of our lives. Nothing is as it was. Everything has been altered. Some things have stopped altogether, including sport. Sport beloved by millions around the world. Football beloved by tens of millions, hundreds of millions, particularly on the continent of Africa, where people basically organize their days around being able to watch matches and being able to congregate with fellow lovers of the game. The game has been paused for several months now. Fans are miserable, but we want to get a sense of what is happening behind the scenes. What are the conversations that are being had by Confederation of African Football officials? How is this all going to play out in this new world that we're living in? Joining us to talk about all of this from Cairo is Anthony Bafo. He's the Deputy Secretary General of CAF, the Confederation of African Football, and he's here to tell us basically how things stand right now. Anthony Bafo, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Aisha.
It is good to have you here. So talk to me about what is happening on the continent when it comes to the game and efforts to restart, because I did see that in some places, Tanzania and Burundi, the leagues have restarted.
Yeah, that's true. Good evening to all the viewers and listeners, first of all. and football has not really started apart from Burundi and Tanzania. We have most of our competitions on hold, but we have also prepared various scenarios, and don't forget as well, we are planning for the unplanned, because we don't know when all the travel restrictions are going to be released, so that people can fly across the continent. What is really important is the health of the players, is the health of the fans and supporters, and all football stakeholders who are involved to help managing the game. We, like I told you, we have prepared various scenarios. We've had an inter-club committee meeting. The inter-club committee is in charge of the organization for the African Champions League. And then we had a women's football committee meeting as well. We have prepared guidelines, recommendations in regards to how to proceed, how we can assist the member associations with restarting football. I think the best example, sorry if you let me finish, was in Germany. They have started, La Liga has started, the Premier League is also going to start very soon. They had a plan in place. They had permanent negotiations with the government, with one of the most powerful women in the world, I would say, the Prime Minister, Angela Merkel, and they came to a common decision. They planned it very well. The players are in quarantine. They have to be tested every 48 hours, and then also in the morning of the match. But can we do the same in Africa? This is the question. What we can learn from there is the organization and the discipline.
Okay. So just to be clear, as you say, you have said to member associations that you will lend assistance to help them restart their leagues safely. What exactly does that look like in the case of Burundi and Tanzania? What exactly are you doing to support them?
You know, one thing you must not forget is that we cannot ban them from playing if there's something, but they know the situation better than we know, because they are on ground, and I'm sure they speak with the health sector, with the Minister of Sports before they come to a decision like they have taken to restart the league over there. What we have done, once again, with the guidelines is we had working groups, medical committee, the technical committee, and our instructors, and we all came together to create a document which is going to be going out very, very soon to assist. And not forget, these are recommendations. Then you take the best out of it to make it tailor-made to the respective country.
So I just want to be very clear on something. So again, you made the point that it is not for CAF you can't ban a federation, you can't ban an association from restarting their league. But just so I'm very clear, is CAF's position that they support? I mean, you can't stop them, but is it your estimation that it is the right move, rather, let me put it that way, that it is the right move to restart the game at this point in time?
No, like I told you early on, they know better than we on ground what is going on there. We see, of course, from the WHO, the numbers, etc. But definitely, it's not a decision only by the federation. It's a decision always together with the government. And for now, we see that things are moving on, and we can only hope for the best, and that things continue to move on in the right way. Everybody wants to play football, like you said in the beginning. People are hungry to watch football, but once again, if it's really, really serious, like I said, we can always recommend and which either way.
Okay. You can recommend, but at the end of the day, the associations would it's still at the discretion as to whether or not they listen to you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so when it comes to the tournaments under CAF's purview, what's the conversation now? Are there any projections for when things might restart? I know that is predicated on borders being open and people being able to travel, but what's the internal deliberation about that? And even as we see more countries beginning to consider opening their borders, how would you do that safely? Would it be again to quarantine players? Just take me inside the conversations.
That's
as much
why
as we can reveal.
Yeah, that's why I said we have prepared the guidelines, the recommendations, how to go about it, when to start training, because you cannot go immediately also into the matches. The players need to train, they need to be really fit. One of the inventions which came out also from FIFA in regards to the laws of the game, that you have they have added a fifth substitute, because they know the players are not in shape like they used to be before. So it's a gradual process, because they were also quarantined at home and started gradually with the training. In regards to the tournaments, the CHAN has been suspended. The AFCON is still ongoing, but like to tell you, that's why we have various committees. We come, we meet together, and at the end of the day is one of the highest organs inside the organization, the executive committee, will take then also a decision depending on the recommendation of administration and the African Cup of Nations committee.
One thing I do know and is that while there's a lot of uncertainty around tournaments and when those start or don't start, you as world football has taken a very clear stand regarding the protests we've seen here in the United States and the calls for justice, and a call for justice specifically in the most recent weeks tied to the killing of George Floyd. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and football's position when it comes to fighting racism and the fight for equality?
I was born and bred in Germany. I was born 1965. Why I'm telling you this is that I passed through the 70s, I passed through the 80s. I was one of the first black players in the German leagues, and I've received all kinds of insults, monkey noises, Negro out, etc. And for me, you see, I want to start by Kaepernick, because he started more or less also, I wouldn't say the movement, but he was very bold to not accept what is happening. And this is very, very important that we as blacks also move closer together, and those who have a voice also come out. And let me say, Europeans also support in that. White Americans support in that. This is very, very important. I give you an example. Samuel Eto'o, when he was insulted and abused, he wanted to walk off the pitch. He came back and scored 2 goals that won the match. Mark Zorro in Italy also wanted to walk off the pitch. His players stopped him. Kevin Prince Boateng, who is very active, very well-known player, also walked off the pitch. But the best thing about it was that his playmates walked off with him. Mm-hmm. And that for me is great solidarity. We cannot make it alone. We need more coaches or diversity in the Premier League, also more in key roles, same as across Europe. And that's what we stand for. And sadly, a life had to be sacrificed for it, for people also to come up, demonstrate. And George Floyd definitely will never be forgotten.
Yeah, no doubt. Very quickly, before I let you go, as you are in Egypt and we don't get to speak to many people from Egypt, can you just bring me up to speed with the situation there in terms of the response to COVID-19 and I guess for you more specifically or more personally, how it's impacting your life?
Well, at the moment, we are still working from home. Also, we are not operating in the office. Like I said, we're operating at home. The situation is there's a curfew, but people have to be at home at least latest by 8 p.m. The curfew was extended to 2 more weeks. and people are obliged to wear masks. So for me, it's all something about discipline and to care also about others. But don't forget, it's all not so easy on our continent. You have homes where people live with 3 or 4 people in one room, and are also not so privileged even to afford masks. But at the end of the day, it's very important to be disciplined and to care about each other, because COVID-19 is real.
Yeah. Anthony Baffin, my friend, Deputy Secretary General of the Confederation of African Football, it is always good to see you. I'm pleased you're safe, and thank you for joining us to bring us the very latest on internal deliberations there at CAF and what could come next. Thank you. Thank
you very much, and good continuation with the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Be safe.
You too.
All right. Turning back to events here in the United States, and the outcry that is building in Atlanta over the killing of Rayshard Brooks. We want to talk a little bit more about this now and get a very important perspective. Joining us now is an expert in the field, Cedric Alexander. He's a police consultant and the former public safety director of DeKalb County, Georgia. He joins us now from Pensacola, Florida, excuse me, to talk a little bit more about this sad turn of events and how he's reading all of this. Cedric Alexander, it is good to see you once again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
You know as well as I do that the Fulton County Medical Examiner has ruled Rayshard Brooks' death as a homicide. He was shot in the back a number of times. The mayor of Atlanta has come out and said this was not a justifiable use of lethal force. Now that several hours have passed, talk to me about where your head's at as you digest what took place involving Mr. Brooks.
Well, there are a number of things. I think it goes to the initial interaction that took place when officers respond. Mr. Brooks was quite cooperative. They appeared between officers and Mr. Brooks. They had a pretty reasonable, respectful conversation. And I think it was at some point they asked him to move his car from out of the drive-through line over into a parking slot, which he did. During further investigation, they determined that he may have been intoxicated, so they gave him a breathalyzer test there at the scene. And they really had the option really to just take him home or have someone pick him up. It wasn't that he was out on the road driving. And I think that would have been one of those opportunities where they probably could have just give him a ride home. But instead, they chose to arrest him, and you saw what evolved after that. It is unfortunate that these types of small incidents, such as this, and even incident we saw back on May 25th, involving Mr. George Floyd, over alleged $20 common counterfeit bill, leads to the death of these two men. And people are outraged in this country, the United States, both black and brown people and people around from other diverse groups. And as you can see from around the globe, people are angry at what they're seeing currently as it relates to law enforcement in this country. But there are a lot of good men and women who serve every day in this country and around the globe, who are good police officers who want to see people treated fairly and justly. But unfortunately, when we have these types of incidents to occur, it just creates a great deal of anger with people. And I think over time, we certainly do understand where that comes from. But as it stands, the question is always asked, did he have to shoot Mr. Brooks? And the question is going to become, he's going to have to articulate, the officer is going to have to articulate to the district attorney and to the investigative bodies why he felt he needed to use deadly force. But I think many of us feel in this particular case, even though he ran from the officers, many feel that even though he shot him, he could have done something very different. They could have barricaded him in. They could have caught him another day. They had his car. They had his driver's license. And many people are seeing this just as an extreme use of force. And that continues just to anger people in this country and around the globe.
So let me talk to you about that. What does the law say? And I know that different states have different versions of this. But what does the law say in Georgia about the use of lethal force?
I can't say specifically, but you must feel that your life is in imminent danger, and the question is going to become for that officer. He's going to have to be able to articulate here again to an investigative body whether he felt his life was in imminent danger. And many people who look at that video would say no. And that becomes the question. But the bigger issue, just as big as an issue, is that too many times we see these events that occur between police officers and men and women of color who are killed. And oftentimes it's over very minor or trivial matters. And was it necessary to take a man's life merely because he ran off with your taser? That becomes the question.
Was it necessary, in your view, for the police chief to step down?
Well, I can't really speak to that, to be perfectly honest with you, because I don't know the history between that mayor and that chief. But I think whatever conclusion that the both of them came to, they came to respectfully, and they came to a conclusion that was at the best interest of the city of Atlanta. But I can't speak any more to it than that, other than the fact I'm quite sure they made whatever decision they came to, a conclusion they came to whatever was the best interest of the city.
What message does it send to have this police chief step down, regardless of whether you support it or not? What's the message you take from that?
Well, I'm not sure if I take anything from it other than the fact that maybe the chief felt that in light of what had occurred and what had occurred the week before, where you had 6 of her officers were arrested for snatching 2 kids out of a car there, 2 college kids. I don't know what the reasoning for it or how people will see it, but I think at the end of the day, whatever decision that chief made under whatever circumstances she saw or were experiencing, she did it, for whatever was the best interest of that community.
We talked about, the question of law with the use of lethal force, but many would argue that it's not just about the law, it's as much about the culture of policing. And, the police chiefs, she stood down, and some would say that just shows that the police are being responsive to a moment of outcry. But how do you, and what that achieves, I mean, that's for other people to debate, but how do you change the culture of policing? I mean, you can change laws readily if you have the votes, but culture is harder.
That is an excellent question, and that is one in which now I can speak probably for longer than what we have time to. But let me start by saying this. Change of a culture starts at the top of an organization with the chief. They set the tone. Their attitude, their personality, their philosophy is adopted by those that work up under their command. And I've served chief in 2 departments in this country. And it became very clear to me, whatever tone I set, my attitude, my philosophy, my morality about people and places and things, my expectations were that everybody that worked in my chain of command would conduct themselves in a professional and a constitutional way. But in addition to me setting and role modeling that, it has to be reinforced with policy changes, policies that's going to work to the benefit of the community to make sure that they're properly served, policies that are going to be open and transparent to the public to be able to look at. And in addition to that, it also requires cultural change, requires who we recruit into policing. We got to recruit people who have a sense of compassion, humanity, people who have a moral compass. What you saw on May 25th in Minneapolis, they had none of that on those streets. No compassion for human life, no humility, no moral compass. I cannot teach that in the academy. You have to come equipped with that. The things that I can teach you in the academy are many. But you have to have a soul, you have to have a spirit, you have to have love and compassion for people, or else you can't be in public safety, or you shouldn't be in public safety. So that's how you begin to change a culture. So it's who you recruit, and then it's how you train them. Are we training them to be warriors, or are we training them to be guardians? And we want to train them to be guardians, to protect the community and be able to protect themselves, but to work with the community, build trusting relationships with the community. And then they got to have good supervision inside, trained supervision, supervisors who are going to hold them accountable to do their job and act respectfully and to uphold their oath that they took. And then on top of that, you got to have accountability. Everybody from the top of that organization to the last person hired. So there's going to be a lot of reforms in this country. There's going to be a lot of laws rewritten, hopefully, and a lot of policies rewritten that are going to work to the better benefit of the public and will work to the better benefit of the officers as well, too. But we cannot continue to do the things that we have seen done in this country as it relates to people losing their lives over trivial matters. That has the end. People are angry. People are afraid. They're sick and tired of it. And this is not some passing protest. What you have is a movement in this country, and you have a movement across this globe. And even in different parts of the world, different continents, different countries, people are protesting about mistreatment. People are protesting about injustice as it relates to their own respective communities. So that's where we are, and that's how we change culture. And it's not hard to do. I've done it twice in 2 police departments that I served in, and it's constant. There's no endpoint, but you have to constantly nurture those relationships between police community. You have to constantly make sure that you know that your men and women are living up to the correct ideas, the proper ideas to serve and to serve honorably.
Well, Sergeant Alexander, it's such a pleasure to have you on the program and to get your important perspective. We want to thank you for your time today, and we hope that you'll come back and talk to us a little bit about the work you've done. You say you've done it twice, changing culture, and we'd love to know more about how that worked and the pushback and where the pushback came from. And that's an important conversation for us to have in the days ahead. But for today, we say thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
It's all about culture. It's all about culture, and it's about leadership and the example it sets and holding people accountable. We're going to keep this conversation going here on Home with Isha Sesay as we watch closely what's happening on the streets of the United States. Before we go, there are 5 major stories that we are keeping an eye on, and we want you to know about them. South Africa President Cyril Ramaphosa is speaking out and condemning the inhumane acts of violence against women, which are filling the headlines in South Africa right now. According to South African police, since the easing of the lockdown restrictions, there has been a spike in cases. One of the most shocking cases involves an 8-month pregnant woman whose body was found stabbed and hanging from a tree in a suburb of Johannesburg just about a week ago. The president said this is a dark and shameful week for us as a nation. South Africa has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the world. According to police statistics, a woman is murdered every 3 hours in South Africa. This is a story we're going to be following very closely as well, this uptick in violence against women as the coronavirus pandemic restrictions are in place and being lifted. But we're going to be digging deeper into this in the days ahead. To Uganda, where pop star turned politician, MP Robert Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobby Wine, has announced that he's planning a nationwide protest in that country against the government's handling of coronavirus. He announced at a press conference alongside another opposition figure, Kizza Besigye, that they are going to be having these protests and they're going to be joining forces to unseat President Museveni. Both have accused the government of failing to adequately protect people in Uganda and put in place measures that would revive the economy from this pandemic. We want to look at the situation that's playing out in Somalia, where the al-Qaeda-linked group Al-Shabaab has announced that they have a COVID-19 care facility that is operating in Jalib, which is a major stronghold for the extremist group. In a speech broadcast on the group's radio network, Andalus, Sheikh Mohammed Bali said, "I'm urging people with disease symptoms to come into the medical facility and avoid infecting other Muslims." Somali health officials have long been concerned about those areas under the control of al-Shabaab, with fear that if there's a breakout, or rather an outbreak of the virus in these areas, that it would spread rapidly amongst the population. The group has refused assistance from the Somali government and also any help offered by international organizations, international health organizations. In Zimbabwe, the country's leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has declared today as the presidential National Day of Prayer and Fasting. President Mnangagwa hosted a church service attended by church leaders of the various denominations at his official residence in Harare, and he asked for wisdom to overcome the pandemic. The service was broadcast live on TV, radio, and social media sites. The president just a few days ago announced that churches were to reopen, saying that they provided essential services, albeit that they open with strict guidelines in place. Zimbabwe has 383 cases of COVID presently. Finally, we want to turn our attention to Kenya, where the controversial rule requiring that families bury COVID-19 victims within 48 hours has been eased. This was a ruling that has created a huge amount of consternation there in Kenya, with families rushing to bury their loved ones sometimes at night so that they meet that deadline. Now we're hearing from the health ministry, and the director general has said there's no need to rush these burials if the corpses are treated well, saying there's little evidence that the virus can be spread from those who've passed on, from victims of COVID-19. So it looks like that will be changing in Kenya, that this rule that requires families to bury their dead within 48 hours, that has been eased. Those are the 5 stories we're keeping a close eye on for you here on Home with Isha Sesay. All right. We hope you've enjoyed the show today and have taken a lot from the conversations. Always want to thank you for giving some of your day to me and being just part of our look at the world and what's happening in Africa and beyond. Before we go, we want to share with you something very special that we've been working on. Take a look. Hello everyone. With World Refugee Day just around the corner, we have an extra special show for you. In partnership with the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, we're shining a light on the lives of millions of people who've been forced to flee their homes. You'll hear directly from refugees from around the globe, and you'll see how their lives have been thrown into even greater chaos by the coronavirus pandemic. We're also taking a closer look at the latest data on refugee movements, plus the inspiring story of this man, Lual Mayen, who went from being a refugee in a Ugandan camp to CEO of his own company in Washington, D.C. We've got a great lineup of guests for you. Be part of the conversation. Join us this Thursday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. GMT. We are absolutely delighted to be partnering with UNHCR for this very special show, which will be airing on Thursday. We do hope that you will tune in for that. Important stories from around the world, and you'll hear from refugees themselves about what life is like right now in this time of COVID. Please join us on Thursday, same time, same place. For today, the start of the week, that's it for this show. Whether you're watching on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, thank you for giving us your time. Apologies for not being able to get to your comments. A little technical snafu right now, and we will get the system up and running. And of course, you will be part of the conversation tomorrow. So till then, please be safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Bye for now.